Okay, this is the audio review for Frozen in Time, The Impact of Native American Media Representations on Identity and Self-Understanding, from Race, Class, and Gender 10th edition. Okay, so media is inescapable in modern society, and we interact with it often hours per day. Media displays and perpetuates shared ideas and images, or social representations of the social world. Representations typically reflect and reify stereotypes of groups that vary in quality and quantity. So some groups get to see themselves often in the media and reflected in positive ways, while others rarely see representations, and when they do, they're predominantly negative and narrow definitions. So according to the theory of invisibility, when a group is underrepresented in the media, members of that group are deprived of messages or strategies for how to be a person. The invisibility of Native Americans in the mass media provides a unique vantage point for examining how media representations impact both identity and self-understanding. So in the reading, they discussed how Native Americans are typically depicted as 18th and 19th century figures. So they're basically shown as somehow outside of time, right? And in the rare modern representations that do exist of Native Americans, there are often negative stereotypes about Native Americans, such as that Native Americans are impoverished, uneducated, or prone to addictions. So the authors argue that Native Americans experience relative invisibility within the media, as the representations that exist are limited and negative. So the authors argue that Native Americans experience relative invisibility in the media, as the representations that exist are limited and negative. Other groups experience this too, but what differentiates Native Americans is that they uniquely experience absolute invisibility in many domains of American life. So Native Americans are seen and learn to see themselves through the lens of negative stereotypes, or they look to the messages in the media and not see themselves represented. Okay, so many of the impressions that people form of social groups are through the media instead of through direct contact. And that's why media is such a powerful influencer, and it's also why media portrayals matter so much. The social messages in the media representations reflect the widely shared yet taken for granted ideas, practices, and policies that individuals use to understand or orient themselves with their everyday social contexts, and really to communicate with one another. Mass media is a potent channel by which representations are created and maintained in mainstream society. So popular media is often the only exposure that some people have to members of other social groups. And so again, this is why it's so problematic when the media conveys inaccurate or stereotypical representations about social groups, or when the media fails to provide a representation at all. Okay, so when it comes to media representations of Native Americans, the article points out that the media does not provide equal social representation of how to be a person for all groups. They argue that this puts Native Americans at a psychological disadvantage compared to groups that are represented in abundance and in positive ways. So the researchers document the lack of representations and point out that the quality of the representations are poor, as the representations not only define Native Americans as a homogeneous group that seems to be frozen in time, but it renders invisible hundreds of diverse tribal cultures into one homogenized group. And with the advent of the internet, this has just allowed these types of portrayals to reach a wider audience. And so, again, the problematic thing is that in the absence or misrepresentation of contemporary Native Americans is amplified when people have no direct daily contact with any real Native Americans. Of Native American identities, mainstream media has limited and narrow depictions that again homogenize Native American identities as one singular image. So the results is stifled self-understandings because it limits perceptions of how Native Americans should appear and behave. So Native American identities, again, are homogenized, again, so it's hard to see them as anything other than the limited media portrayal. And this can constrain self-understanding. So they cite research on the impacts of media exposure on self-esteem and seeing yourself reflected in those representations. So limited representations convey to Native Americans that they don't belong or that they can't be successful in atypical domains because they don't exist in them within the media world. Okay, so prototypes. So invisibility also contributes to the development and perpetuation of prototypes, or socially agreed upon best examples of what it means to be Native American by non-natives in modern society. So the higher group status that you have, that means that there's going to be more positive representations of you in the media, which will provide self-esteem and identity benefits. But Native Americans are denied these types of representations. So typically, being prototypical of one's group is associated with higher in-group status, suggesting additional incentives to be seen as prototypical. But in the article, they demonstrate that when the group prototype is negative, being seen as highly prototypical can have harmful effects by using examples in the criminal justice system and in education. The reading also discussed the issue of superstar role models, right? These high-achieving non-prototypical individuals can be seen as a quote-unquote exception to the rule. Research on superstar role models reveals that exposure to such notable figures can offer some short-term cognitive and emotional benefits, but it yields no long-term motivational effects. So their success is seen as atypical and consequently not attainable. So it's not that these role models are bad. Obviously, they're high-achieving people, but it's just that the role models themselves are not enough because what's needed is more realistic, attainable, and just a plentiful variety of positive role models. So media invisibility also influences how individuals contend with and are impacted by these representations. Deindividuation refers to when an individual sees themselves as interchangeable with other members of the group. This is the case for people who are highly identified with their social groups. Deindividuation is a source of enhanced self-esteem and belonging. But the psychological consequences of this rely on two assumptions. First, the group members choose to belong or identify with the group. And second, that the group is valued in others' eyes. So these assumptions are incorrect for some social groups, as their homogeneous prototypic media representations are limited or invisible, and the few that exist are so negative, choosing that identity is then constrained. So moving on to self-stereotyping, this is the act of choosing to de-individuate with these group representations. And underlying this process is a belief that if someone wants to be thought of as a member of the group, then they must identify or self-stereotype themselves and make themselves more reflective of the available representations. This is important because it shows that members of underrepresented groups may be motivated to identify with any available representation because a stereotypical representation is better than no representation at all. And the article concludes by reiterating how media invisibility has important consequences for identity and self-understanding. By promoting limited homogeneous prototypes of Native Americans, the media prevents the development of characteristics or abilities beyond the stereotypical representations. So they inadvertently promote these maladaptive self-strategies like de-individuation and self-stereotyping that can undermine the potential and the self-esteem or self-concept of Native Americans.